started? Hopefully you guys will have your beers. So welcome to Tech Thursday. We've got an exciting panel today. We're going to be talking about some sprint planning and some complexity in that. And just wanted to start off by welcoming you guys here, but also, sometimes at Tech Thursday, it's hard to make the right connections. So I can't really see all of you that well because of these lights, but if there's anybody here who, for example, is looking for a job in tech, I want to match you up with people who are hiring. I think that would be great. So, and that's what these forums should be for, is adding some value to you guys. So can I get a show of hands of anybody who is hiring? Okay, I got one there, I got one here. Anybody else? Over here too? Okay. If you guys can, if you want, come and connect with me. And this way, anybody who's looking for a job, you guys raise your hands next, and maybe these guys can look around and you guys can match up if you want. And if not, just come up to me at the end as well, and I can direct you to these guys, and then we can help add some value. Likewise, if there's any founders here, if you're looking for a co-founder, or whatever it is, if you're looking for mentorship, if you're looking for help, come on up, talk to me, and I will try and match you up with somebody that's going to help you, because that's what we want to do, is we want to help kickstart this community and get the startup ecosystem alive and well, and also the tech ecosystem, not just the startups, the ecosystem in general. So anyway, I'm going to introduce Gabby now. Gabby's going to come up and she's going to be moderating this panel, and I'm going to hand it over to her, and we'll have a question period as well for you guys. So store up your questions, and then we'll get to your questions at the end. All right, Gabby, come on up.
Hello, my name is Gabby. I work at Neo Financial as an associate product manager, and I'll be moderating this panel tonight. If you don't know what Neo is, we're a financial services company that's entirely digital, and our mandate, I guess, is to make banking better for all Canadians and to give all Canadians better value out of their banking. And so I work on the product team there, and I work on a range of projects, all the way from banking infrastructure to clients to redesigning apps. So I've seen kind of the whole gambit of projects, and I've worked with dev crews and been a part of many a sprint planning in my day. So I'm excited to be moderating this panel with these awesome panelists. So I'll invite them all up. We have Diogo, Ethan, and Rashmi, so I'll invite you all to come up. Can you hear me? Cool. I guess we'll just start by doing some introductions. So if you guys want to go, I'll start with you and say a bit about yourself, what you do.
For sure. I'm Ethan Toews. I'm the CTO and co-founder at 3Comment. 3Comment is an online event management software where we empower event-driven businesses to, we offer these CRM tools and help them manage their marketing and online ticket sales.
I'm Rashmi. I'm machine learning lead at Neralake, which is a company which is formed very recently. We are focusing on automating the process of strategic planning, specifically focused towards non-profit organizations and small businesses, because not everybody can afford a traditional consulting partner who does the strategic planning. So we are trying to help as much as we can for the companies, small companies.
Hey everyone, I'm Diogo, and I do a couple of things. Currently I'm the CEO of Builders League, and so we rally together 100 people in a weekend or other events of that kind to build real-world solutions for good causes or industry. I got my start in tech about 5 years ago with a marketing tech startup with my mom, actually, was my co-founder. She had this vision for making a way so brands could have their own community platforms and I kind of joined in as the CTO of that company to help build out the product. Along the way, I also started teaching at Red River Comp Sci, so kind of been involved in tech all over, but now focusing really on throwing together these innovation-centric events for whether you're a designer or a developer or if you're a product person, so you can actually build out your projects for various different companies. So yeah.
Awesome, thanks everyone. I'll start with a couple questions for you folks. Who here in the audience works in some sort of technical role? Sweet. Who here has ever been a part of planning a sprint? All right, awesome, that's great. So our topic today is sprint planning and complexity points. And so we'll be diving into that topic from the perspective of our panelists here who bring a wide variety of experiences and work at companies in sort of all different stages, so I'm really excited for that. I thought I'd start us off with a little definition, because I know there's at least one of you in the audience that doesn't know what a sprint plan is, because my mom is here tonight. So sprint planning is a process in agile methodologies. Agile methodologies, you might be asking, is a project management framework that's used by a wide variety of folks and companies, but mostly started in the tech space, where teams determine what will be accomplished in a defined period of time and how the work will be achieved. So sort of goals are alignment and focusing on what value we're delivering and how. And then complexity points, otherwise known as story points, are a measure of effort required to complete a task. So often we're considering factors like complexity, the amount of work, the risk, or uncertainty. And often actually when we're talking about complexity points, we're straying away from using time as a measurement, which is definitely a point of discussion. Anyhow, I think what I will start off by asking the group here is to describe briefly in your current role, how do you use sprint planning and to fill what functions? So maybe we'll start with Diogo on the end.
Yeah, so, and this is kind of the interesting thing. So I used to, again, be more involved in a software startup where traditionally we apply these agile methodologies, but now suddenly I'm, at the helm of this kind of more events planning company, right? And so we still do sprint planning, but we also don't necessarily use those terms, but effectively what we're doing is figuring out over the next 10 weeks, we have to put together this 100% event, and all sorts of people have to find out about it, and different stakeholders, and so who's going to actually figure out exactly what we're doing for figuring everything out amongst our team, dividing up the labor. But also, when we actually throw together one of these events, so like the last time we did a hackathon, we had to actually essentially, we didn't call it complexity points, but complexity points for about 90 different tasks that people would have to do over the course of 48 hours, right? So it's almost like you would have to compact those sprints into like little 6-hour chunks. And I can probably dive more into that. But that's generally the two contexts in which sprint planning applies in my day-to-day now.
So, as I said, Neralake is a very big company. So we are in the fifth sprint right now. We have a very experienced developer team, and also we are working with Flatline Consulting with Sakuka. He's very experienced system architect and developer, so he likes to do things in very organized way. So in our sprints, what we do is like we set a goal and describe the goal as like, okay, this is what we want to achieve, and what are the small pieces inside that goal, and then we discuss how we are going to achieve each component. We are working with mainly 3 developers, so, and since they are very experienced, Jeff is always saying like, every person has a way of doing things in their own way of doing things, so it shouldn't be imposed on them. They should be able to identify how they want to divide the task. So what we have to do is, for a fairly senior developer team, is like try to give the high level goals and discuss whether these goals are achievable in the time frame that we are working on. It may be 2 weeks, maybe 3 weeks, and then discuss whether these goals are achievable, and then tell them to divide the task among themselves the way they like, but make sure that we are always achieving the objectives of the big goal for that sprint. And also another interesting thing I learned yesterday was like, we are in the business of automating the strategic planning. So we were talking with a strategic planning consultant from Ambition Edge, and he was saying like, in strategic plan also, they are using sprint planning. Some use quarterly basis, some use monthly basis. So it's like, it's a very widely used concept, but mainly used in developer communities, I think.
Awesome. I'll try to build on those points. I find that sprint planning also like offers a framework where we can bring in multiple different key issues and make sure that we address a balance of customer feature requests, technical debt, empowering sales, as well as pushing the product roadmap further. It offers this like very neat packaged framework where we can kind of neatly address all of these issues at once, as well as it can be a very strategic planning session where you want to focus on key areas of your business, and yeah, that's all my points building on that.
Awesome. Thanks for those answers. I think we're foreshadowing to some of the topics that we'll dive into a bit later. But I wanted to start off with asking Ethan a question. You mentioned when we met earlier this week that you sort of recently implemented sprint planning in your company, or not recently, but you were sort of not doing it, now you're doing it in a more formalized way. And so I wanted to ask you a bit more about how you knew when that was needed, how you knew when it was the right time, and how you knew when you needed something a little more formalized than slinging features from customers right to devs.
For sure, like the journey of sprint planning throughout 3Common has looked very different in the early days. It was more of a prioritized backlog than anything, and every single day priorities would change and the newest thing would be shoved to the top, and honestly it was kind of stressful. Like, you're taking off these high priority tickets and improving the product, and you're iterating incredibly quickly. But after a while, as the company grows and you hit some sort of scale, that becomes kind of unsustainable, and you need to ensure that the features that you're bringing out and the features that you're bringing out aren't going to break, as well as you want to address that you're moving forward in your product roadmap without kind of these utmost like reprioritizations. So yeah, like the journey throughout 3Common, it's evolved from that, and now we're more into like a structured, every week we do sprint planning. We prioritize based on what's important for that week, and it's more of a strategic kind of planning session now than it's ever been.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think that there's all sorts of like cadences that go along with sprint planning, and it's interesting how different companies and different teams even approach that differently. So it's interesting to say, Ethan, that your sprint planning, you say it's more of a strategic planning session as opposed to like a counting points and maybe slotting things in. Is that what you're getting at? Yeah,
well, we do count points. We do. We break down, like, point values are definitely beneficial when you have a large list from the product team, and as a developer, you need to like compartmentalize each individual unit of work into something that can be achievable. So something may be incredibly vague and you're very uncertain, so it's going to be ranked as a higher point value. So through sprint planning, you can take those higher point value tickets and really work through what it actually means in order to accomplish this ticket. And then you can bring the point value down and make it an achievable unit of work, and then bring that into your sprint. And complete that for the week or 2 weeks or whatever your sprint cycle is.
That's great. Curious, actually, who is in the room when you guys do sprint planning meetings? I'll go rapid fire across the table. But what sort of stakeholders do you guys have in the room when you're planning a sprint?
Guys, just want to talk a little closer to your mics, just for the back. Yeah.
Maybe I'll let.
Yeah, maybe we'll start on.
Me?
Yeah, sure. Okay.
Sure. Okay. So when we're planning right now for preparing for an event, it's everyone in the room. So it's quite literally the whole team. That's one of the advantages of a smaller team is I think it allows us to be more agile naturally, and we don't have to not having process for the sake of process, right? And so just having everyone there and figuring out, what are our logistics needs, our vendor needs, our client needs, marketing needs, just everyone's needs all across the board, and just anytime we bring something up and schedule it in, we just adjust from there. As for when we're pre-planning for a hackathon, we can't adjust too many things on the fly. Something I forgot to mention, just for context, in case anyone's familiar with hackathons, when we do these kinds of events, it's 100 people-ish, all working on one project together. So it's not like a lot of little small teams, right? And so we kind of have to pre-plan all the points and features that are going to be happening throughout the entire weekend to everyone, and adjusting if needed to everyone in advance, right? So that was like a 2-month process, and it was a lot more just me and 2 other people at the time trying to figure out, from a development side, what do we think is realistic, and then talking to the client, the main stakeholder, figuring out, does this kind of align with how you prioritize things? And so that one was a little bit more of a behind the doors kind of thing.
So at Neralake, since we are very new, we are in the 5th sprint, we have a lot of wiring that needs to be done. So because of that, first we do is the product person and the technical officer get together and discuss, okay, this needs to be done first before moving towards the next one, because this is important to make sure that the wiring happens properly. So, and then we bring it to the whole development team and discusses, okay, is this achievable? What are the things we need to cut down and put it in the backlog for the next sprint or before, after that, convey and then go from there.
Nice. What's right? Okay, well.
Yeah, so who's in the room? I think that's kind of a vague question where there's multiple meetings that potentially happen between product and a leadership dev role position, and then one's presenting a sprint to the development team. My opinion, maybe you guys will disagree, but most of the product descriptions should be completed by then, so that it frees up the development team to just focus on defining complexity and breaking these down into constituent parts.
Right, so your meetings are mostly focused meeting up with mostly a dev crew who's looking at scope's been defined, it's been signed off on, you're just talking about the how and the how long.
Yes.
Cool. I keep hearing the words sort of planning and talking about how long something's going to take and how we can meet expectations. So I wanted to ask the question, how do you folks manage when priorities change and you have a product person like me in your DM saying, hey, any chance we can sneak this ticket into the sprint?
Sure, yeah.
Mike, right close. This is quite
Okay, for sure. I will just say we're very early on in having a product person, so that scenario doesn't happen very often, but I can speak to the fact that we have a role called firefighter, which is...
Is this a full-time role that somebody is?
No, it's not. It's a rotating role that the development team will take on, and it's a responsibility that we take for any reprioritization of sprints. Yeah, and then that also frees up everybody else on the development team to really focus on what is the current priority, which was previously defined within the sprint. So just to mitigate changing priorities too much.
Rashmi, do you have anything to add there?
For us, still we don't have the one coming in, but we are hoping that it would come out sooner, but still.
So again, and in the two different contexts where I guess this question applies, within the context of creating an event, and our team, it's kind of a peculiar thing. Everyone there is sort of a product person. We don't have like a particular like, oh, this is one product person. And I think this is probably because all of our teams are fairly small, right? But in our case, everyone's kind of involved in that. So any one of us might be sneaking things in at any point. I probably am guilty of doing that more than most of the folks on the team, but I think we all do that at one point or another. During the hackathon, it's actually quite interesting. When we did that, the actual event itself, so halfway through, so actually at the end of Saturday, so it was from Friday to Sunday, right? And we split everything up into 6-hour chunks. So we would have a checkpoint meeting where we'd bring everyone in the room who was like more like a planning stage and see, do we need to adjust anything? Do we have to take something out, deprioritize it, reprioritize it? And what actually happened was by the end of Saturday, we were at a point where we likely weren't even going to have something deliverable by the end if we didn't change something significantly. And so we had to completely change how we were even allocating points, as well as so to communicate that to everyone at scale, like, hey, do these tasks instead. And almost like cut off half of what we originally were planning to do. So that we really focused on what's the really most key and valuable thing at the time to do, right? Which again is a little bit of a different context because we're trying to get as much as we can in with the expectation that we're not going to get everything in. But having to kind of adjust on the go was something we had to solve for by just having like a smaller room of kind of experts, what we call like essentially like the mentors or the code wizards and project management angels in that context. And kind of try to save the day as much as we could. And it worked, shockingly.
Yes, that's great. I might keep you on the spot right now. You have a very unique perspective, I think, on sprint planning because of the period of time that you're planning for. And that's a large part of planning a sprint is like how much time do we have to do the thing? And committing to a period of time, and your time period is 6 hours. 6 hours, right?
6-hour slots, 48 hours in total.
48 hours in total. Okay, awesome. I'm curious if you can just like tell us a bit more about how you approach sprint planning differently because of these sort of unique time periods, these unique circumstances that you're under when you host your events.
Yeah, so I'm a big believer in first principles, right? So if there's one thing I learned in the context of a startup as well is that trying to just apply a methodology without understanding why you need it oftentimes doesn't give you the best results, right? So from the outset, when we're trying to figure out how to do this, because there isn't much of a precedent, right? Like when we try to do like 6-hour sprints within a 48-hour thing with 100, so the exact number was about 84 people coding at once. There isn't really a good comparison. I actually was more heavily inspired by shape-up methodology, which actually I'm curious, is anyone familiar with shape-up? Cool. So like 3 hands. That's more than I usually see when I ask that question. So shape-up is, in my opinion, actually very aligned with like the original Agile manifesto, but it's a little bit different in that it has things like, for example, like circuit breakers, right? So it's a lot about trying to, let's say, defining a very clear point of if we don't hit X feature by X time, then we automatically say completely cut that off from the sprint, right? So the biggest thing, I think, and there's like a lot of little details we can get into, but we try to break down all the features, not too much by difficulty, but by how many people would make sense to allocate to a feature, like what size of small team would be needed to accomplish it. And then also how valuable it would be to the end client if it got done, right? So of 90 features, we got about, I think it was 40-ish that we got done. But again, that was always expected that we weren't going to get everything done. We purposely did a lot more because then people have a variety of things they can pick from. But the key thing was end the event when we realized, okay, we need people to focus on certain things and certain people are better at certain tasks than others, like front end or back end. then we might have, specifically said, hey, these are worth way more points now, right? Or just directly ask them, could you kindly work on this instead? And kind of adjust that way. But the expectation was that no matter what we did, whatever rule and format we had defined, it would have to be in such a way where we can change any of the rules on the go. And that's what we did. So actually halfway through, one of the mentors, Code Wizards, suggested, oh, why don't we have specifically just points for fix a bug, essentially, right? And so people can get points by just fixing a bug if they're not comfortable doing a full feature. And that turned out to be a really, really great idea, because a lot more people could contribute that way. So it was kind of an emergent system, if that makes sense, of we kind of had to figure out what works the day of, and I think the next time we're doing this, now we have a much better rule book for what does work in that kind of environment, so, yeah.
That's great. It's interesting to hear you talk about the focus on how many people would a certain task take, because I imagine you're dealing with this a very short time constraint. I'm no dev, but there's probably only a certain amount you can do in 6 hours.
Yeah.
So that's interesting how your perspective is sort of shifted to how many people versus maybe how much effort.
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, question, maybe, whoever wants to take it will take it. But how do you handle when the sprint just keeps not hitting? And you keep getting to the weekly sprint meeting and there's things that didn't get done and you've overcommitted. How do you approach talking with your team about that? How do you approach readjusting sprint expectations? Yeah, does anyone want to take that question?
I can take that question. Yeah, so that is a very tough scenario when that happens. And the way that we look at it at 3Common is that the sprint keeps going, and you set yourself out to accomplish this set of work, and you're trying to hold yourself accountable to that. So the next time the sprint comes, we do sprint planning again, and the previous sprint keeps rolling with the other sprint. So you're kind of like, oh man, now I got double the work, I gotta really pick up.
Pressure's on for the
Pressure's
devs
on.
at 3Com. So how many sprints have you had running at the same time? What's your max record?
Three. Okay, three.
Okay. Have you ever gotten to completion to zero, to net zero at the end of the week?
Net zero, we complete a sprint?
You complete, there's no sprints that carry over. Everything's done.
Yeah.
Yeah. Nice.
Product manager was on vacation.
I bet. Cool. Okay. A question that I want to ask before we run out of time is for Rashmi. Rashmi has a PhD, if anyone didn't know that. Very impressive. And you were mentioning that you actually used some sprint planning methodologies when you were doing your PhD. And I know Diogo has a bit of experience too with sort of sprint planning outside of specifically software development. But I wanted to ask you about how you use sprint planning during your PhD.
So during the PhD, the thing is when I'm going to show something to my supervisor, it's not working or the results are not the way I wanted. So I had to plan a little bit before to identify how I can actually present something so that I'm moving forward with my research. And also the end goal is always I have to publish the results and have very strong case build why my method works, right? So I started from a basic idea, no sprints there, but then I have to gradually improve my methods as to okay, I have to get to, let's say, point B, but if I'm using a methodology that I'm using now, I'm not gonna get to point B 2 weeks. So what are the other options that I have to look for from now on to get to point B? And then try to plan my time, where to allocate it, where I'm not hitting any roadblocks with my supervisor in terms of what he wants to see in terms of my work, but as well as when it comes to providing results that are that can be backed by what I'm doing and method works. So based on that, like have few processes that are running in parallel and try to like work through it and through a little bit and see whether it's working, and then do a course correction based on the results that I see, and get to the point where I need through like planning my time accordingly. So
Nice. That's great. Okay. Well, I thought we had less time than we do, which is great because now we have more time for questions. Next question is, what do you think is the biggest mistake that people make when they're facilitating sprint planning? What, maybe I'll reframe the question. You could take it in A or B. Why do you think sprints fail? Like, what's the biggest mistake that people make?
one I think is kind of trying to achieve something that cannot be achieved before doing something else. Like you have to do A before doing B kind of scenario, and then you don't recognize it if you don't recognize it unless you talk with everybody and understand. Okay, thing A needs, even though we thought that it's thing A that is there, but it's actually something that comes after that. Because that you have to do a little bit of different kind of development to get to the next point.
Yeah, so really like not understanding what your dependencies are.
Yes.
Nice. Ethan, do you have anything to add on that one?
Speak up, speak up.
Okay, sorry.
Closer, mic closer.
I'm
Just for
apparently
this guy.
talking way too quietly.
Trying to help with the back.
Yeah. I think one that's kind of overlooked is meeting time. If you are taking a long time in your sprint planning and it's taking almost all day for you to break out these tickets, you've pretty much taken up an entire day's worth of work where you could have made this meeting process a little bit more efficient, paired with product, and then bring that product list to dev, and then like the meeting becomes like a 15-minute, 20-minute sync on what are the priorities, are there any questions, let's answer those questions right then and there, let's rank the complexity of these tickets, if any ticket needs to be broken out, let's do that in that moment, and then it's go time, and right, so I think having a long sprint planning meeting can be the downfall of a successful sprint.
Sorry, Diogo, you're pulling the mic up. You go first.
So I was thinking about the question, and I feel like at the end of the day, sprint planning is ultimately about like risk management, right? And there are different kinds of risk. At least with all the contexts in which I've dealt with this in the past, typically the biggest risk is uncertainty of how, like just basically more like uncertain unknowns, right? Around maybe like the person working on this feature has never worked with a feature like that before, or maybe it's like just something very new that hasn't been done. So there isn't a lot of like comparison points around, oh, this is how much we think this will realistically take, right? And so I think honestly, when it comes to like why do these sprints fail, I think I always come in with the expectation that something will fail because I'm used to working with things or teams where something is always a big unknown on how long and how hard something is going to be. But I think good sprint planning comes down to being able to figure out when that unknown is showing up very quickly before it becomes a problem so that you can adjust fairly quickly. So it doesn't matter what your estimates are in advance, as long as you can adjust them along the way, then usually that leads to a net good result, right? Where you still achieve the deliverable, even if it wasn't what you originally planned for. But I do resonate with the really long sprint plans.
I actually have a question for you. Do you adjust your sprint planning points in the middle of your sprint?
Yeah. Well, I mean, when we use, like, for example, like in the hackathon, when we use actual points, yes. outside of that, like we haven't really used like explicit points oftentimes, right? Like we were very organic about our sprint planning process and how it came about, because when we're just like 2 people developing, it's very different than 6, right? I think it became clear that we need a better process when our like daily meetings were taking like 2 hours, right? That's when it became very clear, like, okay, we need some kind of different process. Yeah.
Interesting. So like your context is very much like a one-off sprint, right? Am I understanding that right?
A one-off big sprint, or I suppose so. So actually, in both contexts, yeah. So in the context of like the hackathon planning, you have to do all the planning in advance, but you have to expect you will often have to change it. And then I also find that we kind of do something similar with the other stuff that we do too, where we do like right now we're doing like a 10-week sprint effectively, but we're adjusting almost on a weekly basis, if anything.
Nice, cool. Yeah, I think that I resonate also with the long sprint meetings. I think the most efficient dev teams I've been on, our sprint planning meetings were like 15 minutes on a Wednesday, and the worst was like an hour and a half on a Friday, and you're just sitting there going through a list, and everyone has an opinion, and nobody agrees, and it's just pulling teeth to get the sprint in order.
Exactly.
That's great. Okay, well, I think that maybe I'll ask you guys to leave the audience with a parting piece of advice before we get into some audience questions. You could give a short 1-line, 2-line, 3-line max advice for people who are starting to stand up sprint planning processes at their companies, maybe are working to make their sprint planning processes better. Yeah, whoever wants to start first.
It's not end of the world if we can't get something done. So take a break and start again and look at with fresh eyes. You will see something that you haven't seen before. So
That's great.
Good advice.
I'll add to, like, if you're questioning on which flow to use, like Kanban, Scrum, I would recommend just picking one. See if it works for you, and if it doesn't work, then try something else. And continually iterate. Make sure that you're addressing key customer issues and ensuring that your product roadmap is moving forward. Whatever you choose and it accomplishes that, then I think that's working for you.
And actually, I kind of expanding on what Ethan said, I feel like, actually, first of all, make sure you add shape up to the list of things you're considering when looking at methodologies. I have a personal bias, but I think you should add it to that list. I would further say, and potentially this is what you were trying to say as well, but continue iterating even on your process itself, right? Like, the thing that was interesting for me was as I talked to other people with different backgrounds about different stages of sprint planning, as my team grew and we did different things, our needs changed gradually over time, right? Like, I think the process that works with your team varies dramatically from team to team, culture, experience levels, all sorts of things. So it's something that I think one thing that's working today probably won't work a month from now, depending on how quickly you're moving. So don't be afraid to not only just pick one, but completely change your mind later. And if anything, just figure out what's working as you go along. At the end of the day, it's just expect something will go wrong, and you're gonna have to learn how to fix it anyways. There's only so much preventative stuff that you can do, right? At the end of the day, you need a firefighter, I guess. I love that role. I feel like that should be like a common standard.
I think so. It's been great for us and working really well, actually.
Yeah, we've got weekly firefighters at NEO as well, and they spend their days fighting bugs, addressing alerts, doing all the unsung hero work. All right, I think a common theme I'm finding through all this advice is that it's better to do something than nothing, even if the something you pick is the wrong decision. Okay, awesome. I think that's all we'll do for our panel questions today. Thank you all for your wisdom and knowledge and takes on sprint planning. I think it's been very valuable. I will now open it up to some audience questions. Does anyone have some burning questions about about sprints they'd like answered tonight? There's gotta be someone. All right, right here.
I want to address a question to Ethan. So when you're planning out the complexity points, do you take the research that will go behind it into account, or is it just purely the development? Like, does it matter if the developer, like I think someone mentioned that you don't know if everybody's been exposed to that technology before, or if they'll be able to solve it as efficiently as some other developer on the team. So do you take that into account when like assigning those points?
Yeah, so like.
I'll just repeat the question. So his question was, do you take into account the context that specific developers might have or might not have when you're planning a sprint?
Yeah, like in these meetings are supposed to be very collaborative, right? So like you're gonna have senior developers, you're gonna have junior developers, and they're all gonna have varying opinions on complexity. And that's where you're gonna rely on those senior developer skills in order to like paint a more clear picture for juniors. Like the senior's gonna rank it lower in a complexity point than a junior will. So having a good gauge for where your team is at in this range of complexity, right? And you can take an average. Like, okay, maybe there is a senior developer that thinks it's a 3. Let's talk about why they think it is a 3, and why the junior may think it's a 16 or something, right? Yeah.
I think there's a fun thing called planning poker.
There's planning poker. I've never. We've used planning poker, but we more like just an open conversation over planning.
Cool. Any other questions?
Yeah.
You're up.
So this is to the whole panel. We all talked about like the long sprint meetings, which everybody hates. That's like a disease in my opinion. But like, what's the cure? How do you prevent these? I have not been able to prevent these. Like, if we have like for example a big project, we have 3 sprints. One of them is going to have a 2-hour meeting. That's been my experience. So how do you kind of prevent that from happening in the long run?
So the question is, how do you prevent the long sprint planning meetings?
You want to take it? Okay, I'll take it. Yeah, it's a tough thing to solve, right? Like, there's a lot of communication that needs to be happening between product team and stakeholders, as well as the development team. And I think as long as you can get, like, before you present the sprint to the development team, you scope out as much of the product requirements and the stakeholder requirements in that list before you present it to a dev team would reduce the sprint planning meetings for the dev team like a lot.
I'm just gonna add as well, actually the reason why I was originally attracted to ShapeUp so much was if you go to their website, the very first thing that comes up is a video talking about how they built, did this whole 6-week-long project, or sorry, 6-month-long project, and they had only 1 meeting, or I think it was 2. So it was totally like a 2-hour meeting for the whole thing, right? And in essence, it just comes down to, I think, if you do a lot of stuff async, like the more you can get done, and I suppose that's what you were essentially focusing on too, right, is the more you can get done in between the meetings beforehand, and then you just have to be really, really good at saying, this is the only thing we're talking about in the meeting. It's almost like, even just like, we're just reviewing at this point, right? And making sure that no one starts bringing up extra things, and do that outside of the meeting time.
Yeah, I think another thing on the async work is that if your team doesn't understand what the vision is and what the value is you're shipping, and you're in a room trying to hack away at that, and there's differing opinions on that, then that's probably where the work needs to be done, and that work should be done before you get into the sprint planning meeting, if I could add my 2 cents. Okay, maybe we'll do one more question.
You've all come from different backgrounds and experience levels in your career journey, and so I'd like to open this up to the entire panel, including yourself, Gabby, if you don't mind. Thinking about a leader's role in the successful outcome of what you are trying to achieve in a sprint, whether you are the leader or whether you could design the perfect leader in your mind, what would the perfect leader do to support the outcome or the objective that you're trying to achieve with a sprint?
Okay, so the question for anyone who didn't hear is what is the perfect leader, and who is the perfect leader, and what do they look like, and what traits do they have when you're in the room designing a sprint, and how does that leader best support the room in those situations?
It's a great question. I think it would be a leader that enables and doesn't get in the way of productivity. I think like this is kind of going past sprint planning a bit and more into the development flow, but doing code review, making sure that your peers understand that what good code looks like, and being on top of that so that by the end of the week or by the end of the sprint period, you're not having to scramble and do code review and everybody is like trying to freaking out, trying to get their code out to production. Doing that throughout the week will help and enable your development team. I don't know if that really answers your question, but that's my take.
Yeah, and also like enables like listen to the team and be there for them. It might not be just a code review, it might be a different blocker that they have. So try to be open about it and not be opinionated and judgmental. And listen and then guide them towards making the decision without assumptions.
I think a good leader actually, so to start answering the question by saying what it's not, is someone who's there to just like report deadlines to their boss or stakeholders, right? Like that's not helping anyone. I think sometimes when people, especially developers, have like a bad rep with like, or bad experience with certain product managers or project managers, it's usually the ones that are there just kind of more just to focus on the deadlines only, right? And I think we're kind of all having like very similar answers, but fundamentally a good leader is one that empowers their team to be more effective. And that looks in very different ways, but I think it starts with, as Gabby mentioned earlier, alignment. So making sure everyone understands what is the point of what I'm doing, right? Even if they're not actively asking it, if they understand what's the end value to the customer or the stakeholders involved of what you're building, then they're empowered to make decisions of, oh, we can maybe cut some work here, add some work here, based off of my abilities, I can collaborate with this other person. The moment people don't understand the fundamental value that they're adding in the project and why they can do that, then they're not empowered to make that decision. They're waiting for someone else to say, oh, this is what you gotta do, this is what you can't do, right? And then that project manager becomes a bottleneck. So a good leader, I think, aligns everyone in that vision and makes sure that they're empowered to have that voice, whether they're a junior or senior, whatever role they may have in the team. And constantly doing that again and again as stuff evolves over time. Because you can't just align once and then forget about it later.
Those are all great answers. I think the one thing I'll add is that if to be a good leader is to run a team that trusts each other and that trusts you and that you trust. And I think that the most effective teams I've been on are ones where I'm walking into a meeting and know that they're going to tell me exactly what's not going to work and what's going to work, and I'll trust the answers. As a product manager, where I've been a bad project manager is where I've tried to tell devs what's possible and what's not, and everyone needs to feel like they have value to contribute to something, because everyone does, and everyone's hired for a different role because they have different skills, and you have to let all of those skills have the space to exist. Sorry, I feel like this is getting philosophical. But yeah, I think those are all great answers. Okay, I think that wraps up our panel for today. Thanks everybody for coming out.
Alright guys, so there's going to be a networking now, so stick around, grab a beer or just hang out. And again, if those guys who are hiring, if you can raise your hands again, and just keep them up for a sec. So whoever is hiring, can you stick your hands up just so whoever's looking for a job can come find you guys? And again, if there's anything else you guys need, if you are a founder, you're looking for a mentor, if you're looking for a co-founder, if you're a developer, you're looking for a job, whatever it is, if you want, come up to me and I'll try and make some connections for you. And if you're looking for something, I'll match you with somebody who's got the other side. So thanks to Diogo, Rashmi, Ethan, and Gabby for a great panel. And again, stick around, guys, and we'll see you next Tech Thursday. Okay?
I'm just going to mention also, though I may not be hiring, if you are a product person, a designer, or a programmer, and you want some hands-on experience with a real project, you should talk to me or some of these folks over here as well.
No,